Nikki Haley has announced that she is running for president of the United States. So it's looking like on the conservative side, you're going to have Donald J. Trump, Nikki Haley, and a strong likelihood Ron DeSantis, even though he hasn't officially announced. So should you vote for Nikki Haley?
I would not call Nikki Haley the conservative side. As a South Carolina resident who lived here while she was governor, would not call her conservative.
Haley, that was my question at the top of the show. And I am making it clear that I will not be voting for her. And I want to tell you why. And I want to be clear that I do not have any personal issues with Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley has never done anything to me. Nikki Haley, when I met her, was very kind to me. But I think that one of the things that I am allowed is a more intimate look at the people behind the scenes, obviously, because of my line of work. I get to see these people. I understand how they work with others. And I always try to bring that honesty to people that listen to my podcast, because you don't get to have those details when you're informing your decisions. And so I want to tell you guys not a personal story per se, but an incident that happened with Nikki Haley when I was speaking at the same event as her, because it just allows you to, even if you vote for her, say, Candace told me this. I know that this is true. And what does this make me think about this individual's character? Vote accordingly. So Nikki Haley and I, like I said, never had any issues. I don't have any issues with her. I think it's great that a woman is running. Okay, I think that's supposed to be the point of this. But I did an event with her. And Nikki Haley, I know for a fact, her speaking fee for her events is $200,000. It's not a joke. At $200,000 after she left as the United States ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley was charging $200K plus a private plane for her to speak. And she never had any flexibility, as far as I knew, with that speaking fee. So whether she was doing a student event or she was doing a speaking event anywhere else, you had to pay her that price. And obviously, she was a hot commodity at the time. She was leaving the Trump administration and people wanted to hear her speak. She had a very good public image. So I did an event with her. I was slated to speak at the same event. And this was one of those events that had multiple things going on. So depending on what level ticket you paid for, you could be a part of this one-on-one question answer segment that Nikki Haley was doing, and that was a smaller group of high dollar donors. Or if you couldn't afford that one-on-one intimate question and answer later on, Nikki Haley was going to be speaking on stage. And after Nikki Haley spoke on stage, I was going to be speaking on stage. So I attended her question and answer segment with top dollar donors, and I was with my husband because I was just interested. I wasn't obviously paying for the seat, and I wanted to hear what she had to say, and she was really good. The guy asked her questions. She was very polished. And at the end of it, my husband said, wow, I thought she was really, really good. And I turned to him and I said, really? Because to be honest, I felt like she was almost too polished, and it felt to me that she was very rehearsed. I'll give you an example. They would ask her a question, how did Trump ask you? So how did Trump ask you to be the ambassador to the UN? And she was like, well, when he called me up, I said, the only way that I will take this position is if, and she listed her reasons, and she came across perfectly as a strong, empowered woman telling Trump exactly what was up and what was down. And it just felt a little too instant of a response. It felt too...
I can't take it. So I am in South Carolina, and I know a very different Nikki Haley than the one that she has groomed and polished herself to be. People outside of this state have no idea who she really is, which is unfortunate because a lot of them are going to see that she is a woman, that she is a Sikh, that she was the ambassador to the United Nations. And I've seen emails that she's sending out talking about how Trump hand-selected her for that position. Be really interesting for people to know the truth. Conservatives in South Carolina cannot stand her. We watched what she did, and I'll give you the version of it, the long version. I don't know how much of it you're going to hear. Here you go. Nikki Haley was swept into office by the Tea Party movement into the South Carolina State House, and she almost immediately betrayed the people who worked so hard to get her elected. She was a climber, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people in politics, a lot of people in business, I mean, it's a good thing to have ambition. How you treat people in the midst of following those ambitions, that's what really matters. We saw her after the devastating, just unimaginable horror of the Emmanuel Church shooting call our legislature back into session, an emergency session, to bring down the Confederate flag that stood on our state house grounds. I don't want to get into how everybody feels about that flag. It's a very personal thing, and people have their reasons. But what I'd like to point out is that Nikki Haley was the one who kicked off the cancel culture movement, the removal of statues, all of these things. It all sort of started with her. And she didn't do it because people in our state were at war with each other. She did it to put herself in the national spotlight as being virtue signaling on a very, very high level. You cannot be a conservative. You cannot be an advocate for individual liberties and do something like that. I've had people who were born and raised here for several generations say there wasn't a vote to put it up, there wasn't a vote to take it down, like people should mind their own business, that's what we're doing. They're missing the greater point. She took people's voices from them, and she went on the national stage and she besmirched the people in this state. What happened following that shooting was that the people in Charleston came together. All colors, all walks of life, all backgrounds, all socioeconomic levels, and walked arm in arm and walked across the Thomas Ravenel Bridge in a huge display of love. And what she did was to bring hatred back into the equation by bringing that flag down. It caused massive upheaval all across this state, but it definitely got her on the radar of, establishment politicians from the left and the right. She's a darling. The left would love nothing more than to see her the nominee. It's never going to happen. The other thing people really don't understand is that her being hand-selected to be the ambassador to the UN is garbage. What happened during Trump's campaign for president in 2016 is that one of his early supporters on the national stage politically was then Lieutenant Governor Henry McMaster. Over and over, he came out in overt support of Donald Trump. And Trump is nothing if not loyal. So when he was elected, he asked Henry if there was something he could do for him out of gratitude for his support. And Henry said, I want to be governor. Can you move her out of my way so that I can move into the governor's mansion and be an incumbent? That's how she was selected to be the UN ambassador. And I seriously doubt she had all of those terms and conditions. Whatever. I mean, it's a great story. Certainly makes her look powerful unless you know the real story. There's stories like this in every state, among every politician, and Candace has it all right here. There are things that just don't feel right, where your instincts tell you there's more to the story than what you're seeing and what you're hearing.
Too perfect and polished of an answer. It felt to me like she was reading a script. That was what I just said to my husband. Again, I'm a gut player. I said, it feels to me like she's reading a script, but whatever. It was good. The donors loved it. They clapped at the right moments. They laughed at the right moments, and all was well and done. Moving on to the dinner portion, which was in a much wider room. Again, this was in Washington. It was a huge event. And I had an empty seat next to me with one of the people that was running the event. And I was like, where is this guy? I'm kind of sitting by myself. So he was supposed to be sitting next to me. Turns out he was on stage with Nikki Haley, and she was wrapping up her speech. I had missed the majority of it because I was out speaking at that time at another one of these little smaller events that were a part of the larger event. I get in, I sit, I hear her closing the speech. And at the end of it, he asks her a question. It was a question pertaining to something that had just happened in the news earlier that day. So essentially, maybe this guy's getting a Fox News alert, and he asks her, what's your opinion on the fact that Donald Trump, and I remember that it had something to do with NATO. She was the perfect person to ask this question to. It was like a luck for this person who was hosting this event. Pure luck. You have Nikki Haley, the former ambassador to the United Nations. Trump's done something, he's announced something with NATO, and you ask her the question on the fly. And she gave an answer. I don't remember what the answer was. And that was the conclusion of the event for her portion. She walked off stage, she walked right over to my table, and she was very kind, and she said, Candace, it's so nice to meet you. She looked me right in the eye. She shook my hand, and she said something kind about all of the work that I am doing. Still felt a little fake to me, but whatever. Personal, again, gut feeling. She didn't say anything that rang my bells. About, I would say 10 minutes passes, and the empty chair that was next to me, the guy who was running the event, he came over and he sat down. And I was talking to him and said, hello, and very nice to meet you. And you could tell that he was bothered, that he just was unhappy. And he said to me, you know what, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to need to vent about this. And I said, okay. And he starts venting and he says, we paid an absurd amount of money for her to be here. And he said, she was very difficult to work with. I knew that behind the scenes from other people. that her team insisted that every single question that was going to be asked to her was submitted. And then her team would write back and say, no, you can't ask that. No, you can't ask that. No, you can't ask that. And there's this huge back and forth process.
If this is what's going on, that Nikki Haley only answers questions that her team has fielded and that she's been prepared to answer, she's not going to do very well in any sort of debate on a stage with Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump or pretty much anybody.
Until you get the perfect script of what's going to take place when Nikki Haley is at this event. He said, we did all of that. We dotted our I's. We crossed our T's. We stayed on script the entire day. And he goes, and I asked that one last question on the fly because it was a big story, because it's just taking place. And he said when he got off of that stage, her team swooped in and yelled at him. He got yelled at and completely undressed by her team because how dare he ask a question off script. Because you know how much money we paid for her to be here? I wasn't allowed to ask one question off script. And I went, that sounds about right. It was weird. As I was watching her do this question answer segment, I just thought, this seems incredibly scripted to me. It's almost too perfect. It's too polished. And it just colored my opinion of her. I just went, okay, I personally, for me, would not want this individual to be in a leadership position. And my conclusion was that, and by the way, this happened about 2 years ago. My conclusion was that she was obviously gearing up for a run. She was getting her team in place. She was polishing herself. She wanted to make sure that she had a perfect public image because she was eventually going to run for president.
So another thing that you couldn't know if you don't live here in South Carolina is that the morning after the 2020 election, when all of us watched and stayed up till midnight and saw that Trump unequivocally won and then woke up to the horror of the next morning, also what those of us in South Carolina were blessed to get was this ginormous 4-color, very glossy, very expensive mailer that Nikki Haley sent out to arrive in our mailboxes the day after the election, asking for money over and over and over again in this. She had this self-addressed envelope of sorts that was like this secure pack, like this heavy-duty plastic thing. So she spent all that money on herself and launching her presidential bid, maybe even before then, because she wrote some book that unfortunately somebody gave me for my birthday, a signed copy, and thought I was going to love it because I'm a political animal. But anyway, that's another story. She's not focused on the people that she's promising to serve. She is focused on herself, what she can get, how she can project herself. I don't even know why she's running for president, because she has zero chance of becoming the nominee. And here in South Carolina, there's going to be a lot of really interesting conversations going on. I mean, Tim Scott hasn't declared, but from what I hear, he's going to. And that completely moderate, middle of the road, establishment Republican vote in this state is going to be split between those two. I can't wait.
President, that seemed to me to be a no-brainer. And here we are. My prediction ended up being right. Nikki Haley is now running for president. It's not for me. It's a no for me, dog, as Renee from American Idol would say, because I don't want a politician that is that polished. I don't want a politician that gets angry when they are asked one question that's off script. In fact, that's what I always loved about Trump. It's actually what I told you about when I interviewed him. His team never told me what I was allowed or not allowed to ask. You know, it was always, hey, you want to interview me? Great. You can ask me whatever questions you want, for better or for worse. Sometimes.
If you cannot think on your feet and answer questions, you have no business running for a leadership position anywhere.